Today we're going to be dissecting Paul Harvey's 1965, If I Were the Devil, full clip. So, 1965 was almost 60 years ago. That's a long time. So let's look at it and let's see what we can find. Maybe some things have came to fruition. I've watched a little bit of it. I wanted to save it so I could get a real reaction. Here we go.
I were the devil. If I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness. And I'd have a third of its real estate and four-fifths of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree. See. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States.
Take over the one of the most influential countries in the world.
I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. Wisdom of a serpent.
I want to play this again.
Whisper to you as I whispered to Eve. Of whispers. First, I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper.
This, I did listen to this part, and here's what I thought about this. And I just made a comment about this on a short that I created tonight. Christians united, not hardly. If you look at any other religion, if you look at Judaism, if you look at Muslims, if you look at the Mormon church, there's a lot of connection there. There's a lot of networking. There's a lot of unity there. With us, it's, Baptists, Seventh-day Adventists, Catholics, Christians, Protestants, Baptists, trying to think of all the different denominations, Presbyterian, Lutheran, and some of these, as of late, have gone really wonky by taking on new doctrine. Just if everybody who kind of is like Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, we're not trying to reinterpret the Bible to fit a lifestyle. And that should be good enough for a lot of us to be able to kind of come together and be a unit, a strong unit. I don't think that God would want us fighting amongst each other and separating. But we could see that it happened all the way back to there's some verses where they're arguing over who can eat this and who can eat that, and why are you eating this in front of me? And you'll see that we were arguing about just the smallest things, and Jesus had just left and gave us the greatest gift, and we still were bickering. Have to say, it must be human nature, our sin nature, that causes us to, pick the smallest things to divide us. When I heard him say this, I thought of the verse that Jesus said, a kingdom divided against itself won't prosper. The first thing the devil does is the first thing Paul Harvey says is, if I were the devil, I'd come for everything. And at first, I'd enter the church sowing seeds of division. United we stand, divided we fall.
Whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around.
That is huge right now. Right now, for some reason, people feel like you cannot be a Christian and believe in science, which I don't think Christians do, but I think a lot of people who get into science start thinking science overrides God. And what I kind of find interesting about that is science is just a study of what God has already created. So you're studying the creator's works and you're working and creating patterns, hypotheses, and equations that help you understand what has already been created. And looking at our DNA, we can see that there's code in there, stuff that we don't even understand yet. We sure do take a leap of faith in science to try to explain away the Bible and God as a myth, and then say, well, science is where it's at. And science has changed so many times. It's only as good as its latest proven hypothesis, and it's a wonderful thing. I personally love science. I never thought I'd see science make me believe in God any less. I didn't understand that. You can see that there is a creator here. I'm not believing in the miracle of the Big Bang. That's a good description to describe when God decided he was going to make things, make the universe, the earth, the stars, etc. Let's move on.
I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father,
Look at that. He's teaching them backwards thinking,
which art in Washington.
getting them to believe in man.
I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills.
You could see right there, he's attacking society on all fronts. Everything that we consume, what we hear, what we read, what we see, what we enjoy, entertainment, our education, even things that we use as coping. So he also goes on to say that he would make everything so rich that reality would seem dull. So the fantasy of Hollywood and the drugs to kind of enhance situations and scenarios when you were normal, you'd pretty much be miserable.
If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. With promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions, just let those run wild.
See a lot of that going on today.
Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse.
That's happened. Ten Commandments out of the schools. Kids have no morals. They don't fear God. There's no moral compass being taught. It's just out and it's just said, well, you have to do this because there's really no reason. Because we all agree, the majority of us agree that this is wrong. But if the majority stopped agreeing, I guess it would no longer be wrong. So there's really this just very Play-Doh sand-like morality that just moves with the consensus, where God has morality already embedded in us to an extent and also has set his law of what is moral and immoral.
And then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion.
Seen a lot of that lately. I'm not mad at any type of self-help, or I know a lot of stuff doesn't really get talked about. I don't really see that being a problem unless it takes the place of the entire church service. What we're going to be there to be learning about God, reading from the Word, learning how to apply it, and worshiping God and fellowshipping with one another. That's pretty much what I see church as, helping each other, coming together, building a community.
If I science, I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas.
That is that's one thing that I noticed a lot is that a bottle is almost an idol for every moment. There are some people who can't have a good time, can't celebrate without having a bottle. The bottle's always got to be there. Maybe they don't have a problem, maybe they're not an alcoholic, but they always got to have a bottle. The bottle's there for Christmas, the bottle's there for Easter, the bottle's there on Friday night, the bottle's there for the game, the bottle's there when the homies come through, the bottle's there when family comes through. The bottle is just there. And I noticed that and I was like, why is that? It's not something that's sinful to drink. To be drunk is that's a totally different story. But if you're gonna have a drink, obviously you're drinking to get buzzed at some point. Maybe not drunk, but buzzed, because that's the whole point of drinking. I can see the bottle taking place of Christmas, definitely. As long as it doesn't take over the majority of Christmas, which I don't think most people are like, I got to get a bottle for Christmas. I just wanted to expound and expand upon alcohol is at every major life event for most people. Also, the Easter egg. I remember being little and the Easter egg being really, really confusing and me not really understanding what it had to do with Jesus. I remember going to church and I remember doing the Easter egg hunt and I remember learning a little bit about Jesus, and I really didn't know much or really understand what they were saying because we didn't go to church every Sunday. I think I just remember going around the holidays for I think that we probably didn't go to church a lot.
If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who want it until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. What'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, patriotism, in moral conduct.
That's a huge one right now. Patriotism. One of the main reasons I even started this channel was always wanted to do a podcast, always wanted to have a conversation, which is pretty much what everybody on YouTube's doing. We're having conversations. Sometimes it's, we're playing into the algorithms and we're pulling viral content and things like that. And other times we're talking about things that interest us. Like this is pretty interesting. I would talk about this whether it was viral or not. This just happens to be viral right now. It's viral's echo chamber. What I think here is patriotism really has gone by the wayside. We have a bunch of people who hate America but wouldn't want to not be in America, which to me is crazy. And I'm not going to say I was always America's biggest fan. I'm not going to walk around like I was this patriot from a child. I think a lot of people, if they're going to be honest, went through some times where they were like, hey, I feel excluded and I feel this, I feel that. Um, when I matured, what I realized was those are just feelings. That does not have to do with being patriotic or not. Being patriotic is being glad that you're here and glad that you have the opportunity, and then usually when you say stuff like that, you get the people who are stolen land and you got America was built off of the whole entire world. Let's get the record straight. When you say that, the whole entire world was built off of bloodshed. You got the Aztecs, you got the dynasty in Asia that destroyed, I think it was like a third of the population. You have Vikings, you just have fights in the Middle East and back in the day, Native Americans, we don't have their history, unfortunately. There's probably tribes that took out tribes. There were some peaceful tribes and there were non-peaceful tribes. So human nature, period. And if I left out, somebody somewhere, my apologies. But what I'm trying to say is the whole world has pretty much been at war and been taking, killing, and taking back over and over again, rinse and repeat since the beginning of the time. So when I hear that, it used to trip me up when I didn't really think about it. But when I really thought about the bigger picture, I was like, so pretty much what you've decided is that these guys are bad because maybe they did it last or they did it most, or that's what you're most emotional about. Let's finish this.
I would convince the young that marriage is old fashioned, swinging is more fun.
That's here now. Marriage over 50% divorce rate in the church. I don't really know what it's at now, but it's extremely high. Most people aren't getting married. So there we go. We're not a society that's obviously not afraid of God at this point because we're not we're not being married. And look, I wasn't a perfect saint. Unfortunately, a lot of people want to have a testimony or a bragamony, whatever it is. I would have enjoyed being a square in retrospect and found a different way to sow my wild oats, rather than running around doing this and that. But some people think that, well, since you did it, you don't have the right to kind of tell me this and that. And look, that's a retarded statement as well. I mean, if somebody, you could place something else there that was not good for you, and because somebody ate a Tide Pod, they couldn't tell you not to eat a Tide Pod. Wouldn't you tell your friend not to because you got sick or what? I don't know what happens when you eat that, but just trying to use a ridiculous statement to kind of knock that whole thought process out the way. Let's finish this up.
What you see on TV is the way to be. Because I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing.
There you have it. Keep doing what he's doing, and he's been doing it a long time, and he's not stopping time soon. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts is it's an interesting clip, especially for everybody. You kind of look fast forward and you can see how Paul Harvey, I think they were kind of entering the sexual revolution there. There were hippies and a lot of promiscuity going on, and people were kind of rebelling as a society. If you looked at back then, probably a cakewalk to where we're at now. Anyways, that's my thoughts on If I Were the Devil full clip. It's pretty interesting. Let me know your thoughts in the comments because I'm sure you might have something more to add to the conversation as well. All right, you guys have a blessed one.